Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
To this AGM. We're delighted to have you here. Can I take you, first of all, right back to your earliest years? What age were you when you first said, music is going to make something important in my life? Can you remember?
No. If Andrew had been here, he would have answered for me. I'd never have got a word in. But I have to think of something to say.
School, maybe?
Certainly school was very... You know, in those days, we all sang in choirs.
Yeah.
And I remember, I suppose, as a 7 or 8-year-old, perhaps 9, a man called Mr. Whelan, or Willen, perhaps, was the county music advisor. And he came and got together a lot of the schools in the County Durham area, and we sang a concert that he conducted. So that acquaintance with music began, of being conducted by someone and singing in a choir. It went on into the... I then expressed a desire to join the church choir as a treble. I appeared to be musical.
Perfect pitch?
No. Good God, no. No, I've never played on a perfect pitch, but there we are. It was no perfect pitch. No, music wasn't like that. We just sang. I didn't know the expression perfect pitch.
Yeah.
The scholastic aspect of things wasn't there.
No.
The academic aspect of things wasn't there. We sang. We played rugby or football on a Saturday, and then on the morning, went to see Sunderland at Roker Park in the afternoon, and more often than not sang in a choir or a concert or something in the evening. You're not allowed to do that these days, because you either do that, which is be a sporting jock, or you're a music jock. There's far too little crossover in my experience. But then it was just wonderful. We just sang in the school choir. We finally had a kind of Eisteddfod, if the French, not the French, what do they call it? The Welsh amongst us would excuse my using that word. But as I say, I joined a church choir. The organist was rather good and offered to give me lessons, spoke to my parents and said he thought I was musical, so I had organ lessons with him. My voice, I then got through that awful thing, the 11 plus, got to the local grammar school. My voice broke when I was about 12. And so I was a baritone I didn't go through that countertenor thing. You weren't allowed to in County Durham. They beat the living daylights out of you if you did. I mean, anybody putting on a surplice to go to join the church choir feared for their life. So I sang as a treble briefly, and then became a baritone. So I was a baritone from about the age of 12 and a half, really, which is why I'm worn out now. I've been doing it for far too long. And sang on a school concert when I was about 15. With a voice I could play you, I can't. But I do have a recording of me from that time, and it's quite clearly me. You know, I could play it to Andrew, who knows my voice very well, or anyone else that might, and you would recognize it as being my voice. It hasn't changed in years.
In that period, then, of gradual development of the voice and the musical aptitude, did Vaughan Williams appear at that early stage or not?
Turtle Dove did, I think, and Lyndon Lee.
Yes.
I think we sang Turtle Dove in school concerts, which I've always loved. It's just such a sublime melody, and I sang it at Covent Garden a few years ago, and Janet Baker complimented me on it. And I sang it at in Durham Cathedral not all that long ago, a few years back, and it still has that magic of melody in it that touches you, yes, as he does. Yes. And Lyndon Lee, well, has always been there. Barnes and Vaughan Williams and Lyndon Lee. I remember learning Lyndon Lee with my teacher, Harvey Allen, at college. Harvey sang with Vaughan Williams on a number of occasions. and saying, when you get to the last verse, it's, let all the folk make money, and singing went out of the window. It had become the word of the day, robust. I had to be robust at that moment. And but I remember singing it and have sung it regularly for 60 years.
I took the liberty of looking at your entry on Wikipedia. And so my next question is, how near were you to being a golfer, a doctor, or an organist? Because all three apparently were passions, or at least interests in your
All three in very descending orders as well, very low. The doctor thing was serious, and I, whilst I was enjoying singing at school in concerts and what have you, and having a physics master who not only taught me physics, but singing in the lunch times, he was a very fine singer, a man called Dennis Weatherly, who was, well, Owen Brannigan, of course, from the Northeast, was renowned and worked with Britain and what have you. But Dennis Weatherly had a lovelier voice. Dennis had a warm quality of voice, and at his funeral I listened to him and I thought to myself, I could have done really well by just staying at home and studying everything I needed to know with Dennis. But of course, you had to get to the metropolis, and so I came to London. But so, in the course of all of this, my interest in ascending order, in biology, chemistry, and physics started to go down the drain. The biology has stayed with me. I love natural history, but chemistry, okay, but physics was leaving me absolutely out on a limb, and I did badly at A-levels. But fortunately, music came along to rescue me. And I had that in the background, though I didn't know that. No one had ever wanted to be a musician, a singer, nonetheless, no less. And my headmaster, stumped with what to do with me, sent me to Durham University to see Arthur Hutchings. And he listened to me and said, well, I'm not sure really, but I'll see what I can do. And he organised an audition for me at the college. I came down, and whilst I saw stacks, hundreds of students in the main concert hall there, the college, by the way, is an alternative to this place. Whilst they were doing that, I was in the director's room singing a few songs for him. He sent me out of the room, called me back in after a few minutes and said, what else do you do with your life, Tom? So I said, well, I do some sport, I play golf. Oh, what handicap are you? I said, I'm playing off 3 at the moment. I think we can find a place for you here. So I joined the Royal College of Music and played golf with him. But I never, I was moving away from home. I was never going to be a golfer. It started to go downhill after that. I've started playing again now and I'm enjoying it, but not a 3 handicap. No.
The impression I'm getting from this is that all the way along the line up to that point, you were being recognised by teachers and other peers as having musical quality. What about your family, your parents? Were they supportive, understanding, encouraging?
Hugely supportive, though they didn't know what they were supporting. County Durham supported me with a grant of £300 a term, I think it was. And my mum and dad were just wonderful, or rather mum and dad. Mum's much more polite, she's me mum. And they just watched me go from day to day for 4 years at the Royal College, not knowing what was going to come at the end of it all, and nor did I. But by that time I'd won a prize, the Queen's Prize, and I'd sung quite a lot of concerts, and you get an indication that people are taking an interest in you. So perhaps there's something that I have that they would be interested in. Perhaps I have something to offer. Then the audition rounds start. for various orchestras and conductors and what have you, and it builds from there. You know, you do whatever you can, really. But if I had a sniffle, my mother would take to her bed and worry as what was going to happen at the other end. Once he's got over his cold, will he still be able to sing? You know, what am I going to do? And I think for the larger part, everyone just assumed I was going to teach music. There hadn't been anyone from my immediate vicinity that had done what I had done. It's changed now to a great degree, but it's never going to be thick on the ground because, you know, singers aren't just born like that. We're quirks of nature.
Did you feel at any stage that you were born to be a singer?
No.
But you became one. So
well, I did. I became one immediately. I stepped onto a platform to sing Simon the Cellarer. I went out, Dennis played the piano for me, and I stood up in my school uniform to sing, "Oh, Simon the Cellarer keeps a restore of Malmsey and Malvoisie." And I clearly knew how to communicate with the audience in front of me. It didn't bother me. I wouldn't say I was shy and retiring, but I wasn't a hugely outgoing person. But when it comes, like a lot of people that have to stand on stages and platforms, they find another self. And I found I was very comfortable up there.
And was that the point at which you said, there's a career waiting for me? With luck?
I was asking that question of myself, I think just yesterday, wondering.
I didn't show him these questions.
You see, as an artist, you can never be sure. I mean, there are those, I think, that probably are completely sure of themselves, but they're not what you'd call artists. They're just, well, there are rude words that one describes them. But I think a real artist never has that security. It's you know you have a life that is precarious. You know you're only as good as that last performance that you gave, and you still have to be training, put yourself through that regime, and it goes on and on. All of your life, all of your professional life. When I decided to stop at the end of 2019, the following day I woke up and I started to clear the throat and thought, I don't need to do that. I don't need to check the voice. I don't need to worry about having a really good night's sleep, about not touching the cream or the butter, or having a drink before dinner, or whatever it might be. I suddenly was able to realize that the pressure was off. And I'd lived for, as everyone does, with that pressure for 50 years on a daily basis. And it's just amazing when it stops. And you can have a life, you know. I was saying to Jane just now, it was lovely finally not to be travelling and to be at home and open a drawer and recognise where you keep the knives and forks or the tea towels and things of that sort. Because I was forever away, forever coming home and relearning the house and trying to remind myself, where did that come? Oh, I must have bought that sometime last year. I never wore that. And, you know, the house is full of memories of that sort.
At the worst, and by that I mean the best, when you were travelling around the world at the most, how many days a year would you be at home?
There were a couple of years when it was about 7. Just, you know, you'd leave to go to New York. You'd do 3 months in New York, or whatever it might be, new production, which took a long time. Do the performances, and then the next venue would be Houston. So you'd leave winter in New York, go to Houston, where you were swimming in a pool outside that same afternoon, and you'd do maybe 2 months there, and then I'd go to Vienna directly. I might stop off and do some scrubbing briefly at home, say hello, and then off again. But that happened all the time, really. The only time I got a break from it was when Covent Garden was being refurbished, and they had various venues at Shaftesbury Avenue and the Festival Hall and such like, and there was a period of time there that was less intense than it had been. Otherwise, you were just on the road.
Would you describe yourself as principally an opera singer?
I'd like not to.
What name would you like for us to remember?
Let me think about that one, Sam. I started out at college with Vaughan Williams, with Bach, with Schumann, and other English composers. I wanted just to be a recital singer,
right,
a singer of songs,
yes,
and a singer of oratorios.
Right.
Well, with my voice, my kind of voice, that immediately eliminates a lot of oratorios. I'm not someone who can sing Creation, for example, or happily Messiah, though I did for a long time, and then decided that really I've got to, cut down and keep standards up, and that means losing Messiah, losing the B minor Mass, and whatever it might have been, in order to focus on the things I could do best. And so that went on, and it was strange. Then you had to make a living. So I started to audition for opera companies. I didn't have any training in opera. I didn't train at the opera school. I jumped in at the deep end and watched more experienced colleagues and tried to copy them and find out how to get from A to B on a stage. And I found I was getting more and more comfortable with that. So I'm a singer.
I want to talk to you about opera next, but you did just mention Vaughan Williams then.
I did.
What were the works that you first found to sing of Vaughan Williams?
Well, certainly the songs of travel.
Yep.
Not always as the complete cycle. I've often dipped for recitals. I've often just chosen a few from there, The Vagabond and Let Beauty Awake and such like those first few, just to give beauty to a recital as much as anything, because the sparkling nature of Let Beauty Awake is just
unbelievable,
a wonderful place to be as a singer. House of Life intrigued me, and still does. Silent Noon, of course, one had learned early, and how to sing an E flat softly. And then going to the Birmingham art collection, the Birmingham galleries, and seeing the Pre-Raphaelite collection there, and getting an idea of what all of that Rossetti writing was about.
Yes.
And beginning to understand the House of Life and the world it inhabited. All of that's been really fascinating. Dona Nobis Pacem,
yes,
wonderful. The Sea Symphony, of course, but it's so hard. The Sea Symphony is really hard for the soloists. Both soloists. I mean, the technical demands of it are considerable. And then the 5 mystical songs, which when I sang them at the proms a few years ago,
2004.
Right.
Yes.
Mastermind. When I sang it, I was reliably informed, and you might contradict this, I don't know, but that it was the first performance there.
It was the first complete performance.
At the proms.
Antiphon had been performed in 1930.
Which I don't sing.
And that was it.
That was it.
It had never been performed.
Which is extraordinary.
Isn't it appalling?
Well, absolutely appalling. And there was an attempt to distract me from them as well.
Really?
Yeah, do you really want to do this?
Last night at the prom.
Yes.
Will they
I
be
do.
behaving?
Yes, yeah. But I absolutely love the songs. They're fantastic. And I sang one of them at my daughter's wedding. Love Bade Me Welcome. And they're so significant, I think. And you're at the heart of everything. I make no bones about it. I'm an Englishman. I'm not a Scotsman or an Irishman or a Welshman. I'm an Englishman. So the George flag is flying up there for the time being. And these songs say everything that one wants to say. Oh, so much of what he writes, almost everything he writes, says so much about that is England, I think.
I asked you a question and that you've led on to answer 2 other questions that were coming later, but that's all right. But can we go back to opera? And I'll bring you back to what we were talking about, because there's more I want to ask you about that. But opera, favourite composer or composers?
Where's David? That's a trick question, that one. Mozart, because most of my mortgages have been paid by him over the years.
Così, Don Giovanni, which role would you single out?
I can't deny I do like Mozart, but I can understand points of view that say I don't get Mozart. It doesn't do it emotionally for me or whatever it might be. Well, it does for me, but then I have to live with Mozart, but more importantly, I have to live with Da Ponte, who gets far too little credit. All very well what Mozart wrote, but he couldn't have done it if it hadn't been for Lorenzo da Ponte, whose life is every bit, if not more interesting than Mozart's.
Lived a bit longer too, I think.
Well, an extraordinary man who wrote and gives us an insight, a sort of pre-Freudian insight into who we are, what we are, way ahead of our current times. And that's the beauty, I think, particularly of Così fan tutte. Don Giovanni is Don Giovanni. The story is fairly straightforward, but Così and the Marriage of Figaro, and one could spend the entire day and more talking about the Marriage of Figaro and its significance. But what he gives you there, not just what Da Ponte gives you there, but the music that might then follow by this Amadeus Mozart that goes underneath, and what you read between the lines, your understanding of any particular situation at any particular time in the piece. For example, I bore people to death with this. In the second act of Così fan tutte, in the first act you get the characters all drawn out. Fiordiligi is what she seems to be, stalwart and resolute and absolutely as strong as anything, standing up for her rights and her family and protection of her sister, all of that going on. Her sister appears to be something of a flibbertigibbet, a bit of a drama queen. Come the second act, when these two men in disguise are now tempting them with niceties, before they can even say so, Fiordiligi has said to one of the men, "Why don't we go for a walk along this path into the woods, across the fields, and see if we can find a little solitude over there somewhere for whatever you require?" Fiordiligi says it. The resolute one, the constant one, the faithful one says it to the two boys. And when Guglielmo naturally steps forward because it's his fiancée, she rejects him and says, "No, not you. You." So the dilemma for the two boys then, oh my God, what do we do? Now Da Ponte didn't write that scene. He didn't write the intricacies of what that means, nor all that is entailed in that. You have to use your imagination. Something similar happened shortly afterwards with Dorabella when she invites Guglielmo to go for a walk in the other direction. When the girls next see one, what's this society called? Vaughan Williams, isn't it?
I'll stop you after an hour.
All right. When the girls next see one another, Fiordiligi, Dorabella meets up with the maid, Despina, who I suspect has an animal instinct for what's going on. And she sees Dorabella and thinks, "You're not the same as when I left you half an hour ago. Something's changed in you." And there's a kind of embarrassment about that. And then Fiordiligi walks into the scene, and the two girls look at one another, having gone off with two men who are not their fiancés. They don't know who they are, but they're not their fiancés. And they look at one another guilty. So all of that is for you to develop, it's for us to develop it, for imagination to take its place. There we are. That's what's David, that's what's wonderful about it.
So that's Mozart. Who would you add, if you like, in second place?
Beethoven.
Fidelio.
Everything.
But to sing?
No, he doesn't write well for the voice. It's peculiar. It's a very special way that Beethoven does write for the voice. If it's the girl singing "Ah, perfido" or the Abscheuliche, "Ha, welch ein Augenblick" of Pizarro in the opera, and Gottfeldstungen, these are hard things to sing. And then he'll set Adelaide, which is demanding. It's a long song, but it's very, very beautiful. And I don't think one appreciates it early in one's life. I think it's really, people always said this, music teachers, elderly composers, elderly conductors, whatever, they said, you'll grow into it. I remember Simon Rattle saying, I could never do Beethoven. Oh, well, he has. It's something that one does grow towards. And Beethoven, I can sit and listen. I understand it now, I think. The energy levels in myself are less, and I can sit and just tolerate Beethoven more than I've ever been able to.
Yeah. We're moving slightly away from opera, and I'm happy to do that, but I just want to ask you one question more on opera, and that is, have you ever sung Vaughan Williams operas?
No.
And no plans to do so in retirement?
It's not from choice, it just never occurred.
People don't program it?
No.
Then?
They don't think of him as an opera composer.
No.
If I don't know whether there's the need for a really imaginative director to get a look at the score and think we can do this, or whether Vaughan Williams just doesn't have that theatrical nous or something that Britain seemed to have.
Sure.
A lot of people would say that, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Because it always astonished me that Britain had it.
Yes, the Society has long wished to see DVD recordings of the Vaughan Williams operas. I mean, they're all on CD, of course, and have been for 20 years or more. But only one on DVD, which is Riders to the Sea, which is a great shame, because I think we all accept that he's not the greatest of opera composers, but we all think that people ought to be able to make up their own minds, and alas, as far as DVD is concerned, that's every possible.
I think people ought to be able to make up their minds about Vaughan Williams generally. He's not sufficiently appreciated in this country. I mean, it's an extraordinary voice, and thankfully we have this moment in time to recognise it, but I still feel there's a neglect of the man after all this time, and it's not warranted at all. He's the most wonderful composer with the most extraordinary communicative gifts.
Can I read you something that you wrote 30 years ago?
I wrote 30 years ago?
Foreign Parts.
Oh my goodness.
Quote, for the past year, I've quietly been buying recordings of the Vaughan Williams symphonies, not realizing that I am part of a trend to give more exposure to his work. I hadn't listened to him properly since my student days in the late 1960s. There's some wonderful writing in the Sea Symphony that sums up everything that is English music, in the same way that Janacek, for example, uses an orchestra to produce a sound unique to him, so it is for Ralph Vaughan Williams.
Did I write that?
Well, it says so here. 31st of July 1992, you were working on a work of John Caskin, which he'd written for you, Still Mine.
Still Mine, yes.
And you were revising the Sea Symphony. And the Vaughan Williams setting of Walt Whitman's words was so wonderful because it deals with the sea and ships, and few things stimulate me more than those particular subjects. I was born by the sea, and I miss it more and more as time goes by. 30 years and 3 months ago.
I haven't changed much, I'll tell you.
I don't think you have. I thought I'd remind you of that long time ago.
I'd forgotten.
You've mentioned the Sea Symphony. Do you have particular memories of performances of the Sea Symphony?
Yes, I do. There was one in Scotland a few years ago with Lisa Milne, who doesn't sing any longer. I think she's still teaching, but she's a miss, a loss to us. And an even greater loss is Bramwell Tovey.
Oh.
And I was at Bramwell's funeral down in Kent a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
We got to know one another too late. In fact, the first acquaintance with him was in Scotland for a Sea Symphony. And it remains the outstanding memory of that work that I have. It was just right. He just knew what to do with it. And I enjoyed it enormously. and then his funeral. And I worked with him last in at the Hollywood Bowl, and he was wonderfully communicative. He had a great gift of speaking to people, generally in big audiences, and they loved him for it. It was a gift, and playing that symphony it stays with me. It's a very important memory. The other memory I have of it is recording it with Slatkin in May, I think in Abbey Road, the big studio at Abbey Road, with Benita Valenti was the soprano. And we finished the recording, and it was nearly Christmas. Was it the LPO or the RPO? Maybe, I can't remember. LPO, I think, maybe. Anyhow, the recording finished, and Ursula was there, and was wonderful. She was thrilled a bit to see the completion of the symphonies right the way through, I think. And a moment later, Santa Claus and Mrs. Santa Claus walked into the room, and some blaring music started, and they started to strip off. And there were strippogram Santa Clauses and Mrs. Santa Clauses brought in for this occasion. I can't think of anything more inappropriate to have happened at that time. Yes. Ursula Vaughan Williams, 2 stripograms come on and start taking their clothes off. And having taken their clothes, we've just finished the symphony, having taken their clothes off, they then have to stand and eat mince pies and have a glass of sherry before going out to dinner. It was the most ridiculous, surreal situation I've ever come across.
For the completion of this story, which I suspect everybody will now remember, was it anybody in particular that they were stripping in honour of?
It was for Vaughan Williams, I'm sure.
Oh, right.
But sadly, he couldn't witness this event.
This time. No, too late.
No, but everybody, the awful thing was that everybody was embarrassed and didn't know what the hell to do, how to react or anything. It was just silly. That's London orchestras for you.
Oh, right. You like poetry, I know. You love poetry. How do you get on with Walt Whitman?
Oh, I get on pretty well with him.
Singing his verse?
Yes, absolutely. I like his verse very much.
Yeah.
I like what he writes.
Not everybody does.
No, they don't. But maybe it's to do with the fact on the beach at night alone, you know, the length of those waves just coming in oilily onto the shore, and the way he writes about it, I get it. And it's wonderful that at the moment at the National Gallery there's this exhibition of Winslow Homer as well, and I always think of the two together somehow. Winslow Homer, of course, painted for 18 months of his life in the northeast of England. So I like Winslow Homer for doing that and everything else that he did. And Whitman's poetry seems to marry with it very well. So I wouldn't say I spent a huge amount of time reading it, but it's there. Yes, it's on my shelf very prominently.
Now, you have performed for 50 years this year at the Promenade Concerts. Your debut was in July, the 30th of July, we established earlier, 1972, when you stepped in at the last minute as a replacement in the Christmas Oratorio. And the following year you were back for the B minor Mass. But you've only ever sung Vaughan Williams twice at the Proms. The second time you mentioned was the 5 mystical songs, to which I shall come in just a moment. Do you remember the first time?
Was it the Serenade?
Yes, it was. 1994.
With Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah, we recorded it at the same time. There was a vast array of the great and the good of British vocal artistry.
They collected a very fine 16, didn't
I'd forgotten when it was, but there have been... It has cropped up on a number of occasions. The first one at college, when 16 of us were instructed in how to sing Vaughan Williams by Sir Adrian Boult.
Who should know?
Who should know? And I remember very distinctly as a student listening to his performance of Job. There was a buzz around the college, both doing Job, and I thought, yes, and what does that mean? So I was on a very steep learning curve. Yeah. So went along to hear Boult do Job, He was an extraordinary man. Not Joe, but Bolt.
They both.
Both were. Patience. And then, because he was this sort of First World War military figure that used to drift into a room, you know. He had a sort of, for a great big man, he had this sort of shuffling gait, which may have been to do with his age, I'm not sure. And then this immense stick that he wrapped rubber bands around in order to give him a kind of
flexibility.
It had a flexibility, and it gave him a greater range with it as well. He didn't lose his grip on it, that was for sure. But it was just there. And he took great pride on one occasion. He was doing Beethoven 8, if I remember. And there was a bit of a stir in the orchestra. There was a bassoonist called Nicholas Hunker, a very fine student at college, who got the message through to the front desk that his part wasn't on the stand. And this got to Sir Adrian. Sir Adrian said, no part. Where's your part? It's not here, Sir Adrian. Turned round and said, is there anyone from the library here? Well, you better have my score. So he gave him his full score. And of course, he probably stole it himself, you know, in order to show that he could do it from memory. And so there it was. We had Beethoven 8 with Bolt conducting no score, and Nick Hunker trying to read tiny bassoon notes from this full score on his desk.
And which of them finished first? Do you know?
I can't remember. I do remember Todd Handley having to prepare Mahler 8 for him, which was one of the first experiences I had at college. It was the combination of all the Royal Colleges in London. We all got together to be the chorus for the Symphony of 1000. Handley was directing, rehearsing for Bolt, and we finally got to the Albert Hall. And on that occasion, the newspapers reported that at least 100 voices came in at least 2 pages early in this particular section, and they did. It was terrible.
It's a long time.
Terrible.
Now, your second prom was, of course, the last night of the proms, which we alluded to earlier, the 5 mystical songs. First performance. Yes, that was worth waiting for, wasn't it? 1911, Three Choirs Festival in Worcester. First performance.
I wasn't there.
You weren't. You didn't even know it?
No.
But you sang it at the last night of the proms, 2004.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes, I do. Yes, it was
Scary with all those badly behaved people with flags, or not?
terrifying. My history of being at the proms has not been wonderful. Thank you very much. It had been 20 years before when I had a little mishap there.
Yes. I wasn't going to ask.
No. Richard Baker, of blessed memory, used to always do it. Whenever I saw it, was tell me about the proms. Oh, shut up. Last night of the proms, if you're going to be a soloist, it's a day that never seems to end. Right. You know, you get up in the morning, you think there'll be a rehearsal at such and such a time, and then such and such a time, and then there's this and that. It stretches and stretches and stretches, and finally, having had the afternoon rehearsal, I went to the hall in the evening, and I was there early again, and walked up the bull run up to the onto the on the stage. That's what it's called. Yes. And I could see banners flying, and it was like either it was like a TUC rally, or it was a Durbar for Queen Victoria. I don't know. I couldn't decide what was going on out there, but it was really terrifying to see this.
A bit of Sunderland Football Club as well.
There might have been a wee bit of that about it. Yes. But I couldn't hear anybody saying how we're the lads at the time. But never mind. But it was, the buzz was enormous, you know, that you can feel the atmosphere building, and then you've got to summon up the courage to walk out there and hope that you can remember what it is that you have to sing.
But they're with you, aren't they?
Oh, they're with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but they can put you off as well. You know, you're desperately trying to remember. I've forgotten the words now. Rise high, thy noisy. But you're aware of absolutely everything that's going on, and anyhow, it works out. It was
a thrill afterwards.
It was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. And we all thought so
But rather
too.
like beating your head, it's good when it stops.
I can only claim to have watched it on television.
Right.
But the hairs on the back of my neck rose when I heard that. I really have to say that. I'm sure others would say the same. Was anybody actually there that night? Last night of the promise.
You missed a treat.
You missed. Yeah, great concert. Okay, let's change the subject again. How many different languages have you sung in? Have you any idea?
About 8, I think, something like that.
Only 8. Right.
Only 8.
Only
yes.
8. Yes.
Well, French, German, Italian, Spanish, English, Russian, Czech.
Yes. Glad you mentioned Czech.
So, yes, indeed. Some Portuguese, some Scandinavian, some Swedish in particular, and Norwegian. Oh, 10. 10.
And are you famous for any particular language other than English that you're good at, or are you equally good, would you think?
Famous.
Which is the most difficult one?
Well, I missed Russian, didn't I? I wonder why. I love language generally.
Yes.
Because it's not just a question of learning a language and speaking a language. It's a question of trying to find out the colours and why a word is said in a particular manner, and what that does to the nature or the nature of the person from whom that word stems, and what makes them up. And so you try I do, I don't know whether everybody else does, but what I try to do is to understand what makes an Italian tick, or a German, or a Frenchman, and in so doing capture the real essence and get into the whys and wherefores of the written word. And I think that's the job, part of the job anyhow. Some would say not, that, I mean, Richard Lewis, the great English tenor, or Welsh tenor, whichever he was, I mean, used to sing "Il mio tesoro intanto," which was a strangulated version of a very strange dialect of Italian. He had no skill for language. He had a wonderful skill for singing, but the language wasn't... absolute accuracy in the language wasn't important to him. I wish it had been, because it's easier to listen to. But others are like that as well. I mean, you listen to Peter Schreier, for example, who in his own tongue, fine, but you listen to the quirks and anomalies of him singing a similar role, Ottavio or Ferrando in a Mozart opera, and the Germans are notoriously bad at correcting that aspect of interpretation. But I love the German language. I mean, it gets such a bad press for its harshness or whatever, but actually it's so expressive. And the hardest language of them all is English.
Really?
Yes. It's for us as English speakers, because we assume that what we're delivering must be right because it's my native language. No, not the case. There are so many levels of a spectrum that you can explore within the pronunciation of any particular word. Yes. You know, in Billy Budd, for example, I always, towards the end of Billy Budd, when he sings that thing, Billy in the Darbies, look through the port comes the moonshine astray. The moonshine is not sunshine, so it's cold, it's a white light, it's not a warm light. So I try to reflect that. I try to, when he talks about fathoms down deep, I try to think of the colour of the voice at that particular moment. It's called something. Somebody remind me of the word. It's not amniocentesis. It's something quite like that. Synesthesis. And it's this association of sound and colour and everything else. I mean, it actually does have a significance, I feel.
Memory. You need to have a fairly good memory to learn and to remember. Have you got a good memory? You must have.
My wife says I've got a phenomenal memory.
Did it come from training, or did you always have the ability to remember what you
No, I think you learn it. I think you acquire methods. I was working, we were doing an interview some years ago in San Francisco where I was performing Eugene Onegin in Russian with Nikolai Gyarov, who was Russian speaking, of course. He was Bulgarian, but he was Russian speaking. And his wife, Mirella Freni. And Mirella had only moved into this repertoire because of her marriage to Gyarov. She would never have touched it otherwise, but late in her career she started to sing in The Queen of Spades and also Tatiana, memorably, wonderfully well. But the words, she didn't speak the language and the words meant nothing to her. And I remember her saying that there's a pushka, and she knew she had to say this particular thing. And she said, you know, Tom, how I remember this? I say pushka, and I think of Ferenc Puskás, who played football for Hungary. Yeah, well, we all have our ways of doing things. And so memory, yes, I mean, it's. I think it's probably not what it was, but I had, at times, had been very, very busy, and on one occasion, I remember coming home from Los Angeles, and I had Bohème to come, Tannhäuser, and Fledermaus in very quick succession. And Fledermaus, I didn't know. I gave myself the task of learning it in 3 days, and it was all right. It worked. When you have to, you have to. I wouldn't do it now. I couldn't do it now.
When you tackled a new role in a foreign language, did you go straight to the foreign language, or did you look at the English first so that you could better understand what you were singing?
Initially, I started my professional life with Welsh National Opera, and everything was sung in translation, so the job was done for you. Although the annoying thing about that is that you do spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find a better alternative for the translation. And then as years go by, you become more and more familiar with the principal languages that you work with, and I didn't resort to that. Occasionally you've got to get into the Langenscheidt or whichever dictionary you use and find out the exact meanings of things, but mostly it was just stick with the text and went from there.
Tackling a new role, a big role, I don't know, Don Giovanni, Beckmesser, and I've been asked to mention The Forester and Cunning Little Vixen.
Oh, yes.
How long would it take you typically to prepare a new role?
Giovanni I first encountered in 1969, at the end of 1969, when I'd been a member of the chorus at Glyndebourne and caught the attention of some people, and I was offered a concert performance of it in Belfast. And so I thought, well, that's fine, I'll give myself 3 weeks to learn Don Giovanni. That should be all right. I can usually do things. I couldn't get near it. I had no experience at that time of the Italian language, of the intricacies of recitative. And finally someone said to me at one rehearsal, come back, maybe in a few years' time.
Oh.
We think you're not quite ready for this, and I wasn't. But it was a sad lesson to learn, and I went away and made myself ready for it in no uncertain terms. That then came back again to me about 8 years later at Glyndebourne, and I had done my homework by then. I was much more familiar. And Giovanni, I think you just live with it over a period of months. Pelléas and Mélisande, I spent a year pretty solidly just looking at it on a daily basis and wanting to absorb it slowly because it's so different from everything else. Beckmesser, I thought I'd never learn, but I sat with it day after day after day for weeks. And when I remember being in La Scala with a Swedish tenor, sadly gone now, Gösta Winberg, And Joost said, Tom, I'm really looking forward to the Meister Singers we're doing at Covent Garden soon. I said, yeah, me too. It's a new role for me, and I haven't started yet. It's too late. It's already too late. You can't do this. It's too late. You can't do this. So I said, well, Joost, I have to. Don't worry. So I went away that night with a score from La Scala and started thinking, and it was fiendish to learn. But maybe the best thing I've ever done in my life.
Really?
To set myself the task of learning that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you are legendary in that
wonderful
role.
piece.
One has to say that. Yeah.
And Czech.
And Czech?
You mentioned Czech, yes.
I mentioned Cunning Little Vixen.
I'd sung this piece on several occasions in English translation, and even more than I described before, the time taken up in finding alternatives. You've not only got to find an alternative to the Czech word, you have to find a Janacek rhythmic pattern that might work, or something that resembles what he originally wrote. And it's not always easy. Dostaneme orsku, spolknutí na fičičku, pani mami řeknu, že jsme čekali na poverty. I can still remember it.
You're doing very well. Everybody's following you
Absolutely,
very closely.
you all know exactly what I've said.
Yes.
But those rhythms are very difficult to replicate in any other language.
Yes.
So the joy came one day of having to sing it in Czech with a lot of Richard Novak and a whole lot of Czech singers that were remarkable, and I had a lot of help and a lot of nudging from them here, there and everywhere. And it's one of the loveliest things to have done.
Yes.
Really is.
They say you were very good.
I was quite good. I was all right. It got better as each decade went by. 77 I did it first in Glyndebourne. I think 10 years went by and I came back to it with a different look. And another 10 years went by and it was different again. And then the last ones were in San Francisco. And we had a ball. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Great opera. Yeah. Okay. Back to VW.
Yes, please.
What's your take on the great argument? Did he write his music in response to world events of one kind or another? Viz. The Fourth Symphony, viz. The Sixth Symphony, the Fifth Symphony.
Is this the same argument about whether it's programmed music or not?
Did he write about his own life and his experience? Was he reflecting on his wretchedness at the illness of Adeline, his love of Ursula? Or did he do what he said he did, which was just write a piece of music when he felt like it? Where do you come down on that?
My teacher loved him. Harvey had a wonderful respect and regard for him whenever he was with him. Keith Faulkner was the same. I don't think Vaughan Williams was a man who would say, would be dismissive of anything and say that I just write what comes to me. This is a man who went to the First World War as a 40-year-old, for heaven's sake. You don't do that because it suddenly, as a whim, came to him. You do that because you have a considerable mind, a considerable spirit, something that's not easily dismissed. His wife was there, she was ill, he went through all of that, and then something came into his life called Ursula, bear-like. And she affected him hugely. And I think all of this points to a very great depth in the man. I don't think anything was just taken for granted. Okay, I think he's one of those people that must have kept so much in reserve, but there was so much to keep in reserve. What he offered when it came, in whichever way it was, in the London Symphony or wherever, was so deep and so deeply felt that he would make light, I think, of the issues that he bore. I think if one had the privilege of sitting down with him for any length and really got to know him, maybe I should have talked more to Michael Kennedy. Maybe he would have expressed things and you would have understood him. It would have been wonderful to do. I can't think that he was anything but a profound man. There was some deep beliefs and loves in there with a most wonderful spirit. I wish I'd known.
You haven't quite answered my question.
What was the question?
You've given
My memory's going.
You've given a very interesting answer. But my question was, do you think that in his...
You recognise this as a politician, of course, don't
you? Of course,
you?
absolutely. Yes. A former politician,
yeah,
like you're a former singer.
Yeah.
I suggested that some people say when they listen to, say, the Fourth Symphony, that he's anticipating the rise of Nazism. Other people say he's angry with life at the suffering of Adeline. And other people say, well, look at what he said. I don't know whether I like it or not, but it's what I meant. Which, of course, is the traditional VW twinkle in the eye and chuckle in the tone.
Yes.
I'm sure. Wonderful, understated sense of humour.
Yes.
But which do you think of those three as the best theory?
Well, I'm no expert, obviously. This room is probably full of far more informed people than I am. It's just an inkling that one has of what one understands of him. But to foresee Nazism, how does one do that? Because it's something that hadn't ever existed before. It's so easy now, I mean, just to extend that example, it's so easy for us now to pontificate about, if I'd been there, I would never have done that. But can you really say that? Can one recognise exactly, if we take this period of history we're living in now, day by day, with what is going on, what are we individually doing about it? We're just living with it and watching it happen day by day. I've been to Munich on many occasions and looked at what exists there and just outside of Munich. Would I have recognised what was going on there at the time? Did Vaughan Williams in his distance know what was going on there at the time? There were signs that caused us to worry, but you couldn't foresee the outcome, the final outcome of that.
And the Fourth Symphony had been in his mind for quite some time.
Yes, without that influence. Yes.
Anyway, but I just thought I'd pop that as an interesting question. I think another small piece of music. Shall we have two small pieces of music? And I think that what we've said already is enough for you to realise that I'm going to choose Songs of Travel. And feel free to hum along if you want to.
Let beauty awake in the morn from beautiful dreams, beauty awake from rest. Let beauty awake for beauty's sake, in the hour when the birds awake in the great, and the stars are bright in the fall soon or late, let what will be o'er me. Give the face of earth around and the road before me. Wealth I seek not, hope nor love, nor a friend to know me. All I seek the heaven above, and autumn fall on me, where afield I lay. Silencing the bird and tree, biting the blue finger, white as meal the frosty field, on the fireside haven. What to autumn will I yield? What to winter Let the blow fall soon or late, let what will be o'er me. Give the face of earth around and the road before me. Wealth I ask not, hope nor love, nor a friend to know me. I ask the heaven above, and the road below me.
And to think that Vaughan Williams managed to write that without any French polish, isn't that splendid? A couple of memories, Tom, just to ask you your feelings on before we wrap up. The Golden Jubilee concert at Buckingham Palace for the celebrations there with Her Majesty.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do, yes.
Largo al factotum.
Yes.
You got every Figaro in? You absolutely every last time?
Oh, I think so.
I think you did.
As required.
Yes.
With a few extras too, perhaps.
That was quite a big audience too.
It was 12,000 of Her Majesty's closest friends in the back garden.
Brian May on the roof.
Well, that was the following weekend.
Oh, that was the following.
Yes, they
was
kind of overlooked the fact that we were there.
Yes.
Instead, the Pop took over the following week.
I conflated the two. Sorry about that.
It was extraordinary. We know how well these things can be organised, and they were on this occasion too. They built in the garden this massive shell with Andrew, of course, conducting. Yes. And we were housed there. It was a sort of our own village for 3 or 4 days. Really? Yeah. And we were taken in by one car into the Royal Mews, transferred to another car for security reasons, I think, which then took us to either a restaurant, a bar, our room, or the stage itself. And eventually came the event. I got a cold, but I was determined to sing through it, and I did. One of the strongest memories was of standing there singing. By this time, I think I was singing "Who Were the Yeomen of England," and seeing half of the 12,000 people waiting and trying to get into a loo over there somewhere. Meanwhile, in the back, in another enclosure that had been created, the rest of the royal family sat. It was an extraordinary evening.
This wasn't a protest at German music, I assume.
No, I don't think so. It was fantastic. You just go out and give it everything you've got. Yeah. And I suggest they wanted something else for the program. I suggested Edward German's "Merry England," which seemed to go down well. And afterwards we went into a little room and stood around in a circle whilst Her Majesty and Prince Philip came round. And Prince Philip said to me, "I can tell you this now. You're still singing then?"
Yeah.
I didn't know what to reply to that. I was completely stumped.
Remind me to tell you what he said to me after we finished.
Right.
And what do you remember of being knighted in 1999? If you can say what she said now.
Going there to this place for these occasions is extraordinary. Just to extend the story slightly, there was the great conductor John Pritchard. John Pritchard was invited there for one event or another, and he was taken there by Terry, his man, in their car, their sports car. And immediately afterwards, they were going to the south of France, to a house in the south of France, where John didn't like the toilet paper. So they'd filled up the boot with Andrex, along with the rest of their luggage, and came to Buckingham Palace that had the right sticker on the windscreen of the car, drove up, and the policeman stopped them and said, "Good morning, sir. Are you here for the ceremony?" "Yes, that's right, yes." And could we just check the car, please? So I went around the car with the mirrors and various things and got round and could you just open the boot? So I opened the boot and fine, closed it again and went round to the front of the car and said, "Nervous, are we, sir?" I took a taxi. It's extraordinary. You arrive there and everyone is smiling because there's nothing to be sad about. It's a day for everyone to enjoy, and you're ushered like sheep. What are you here for? Oh, yes, case. So you go in that direction, follow the red carpet or whatever, and then you're taken to an ante-chamber where Norma Major was getting something and I was getting something and one or two others. Then you're addressed by men who've come straight out of Gilbert and Sullivan, who tell you exactly what the procedure will be, how you go forward, you kneel at this thing, there's a stick there to help you get up again after Her Majesty's, and how will you know when it's finished? And said, "Oh, you'll know." And you know because, I'm sure many of you have been through this process, because Her Majesty used to put out her hand, shake it, and then rather like a Nigel Gresley steam engine, boom! That's the end of that little meeting, and you were off. I mean, it was like a piston that went back and forth, you know. Yes. Anyhow, you knew, but it was wonderful. And of course, the man stepped forward. He sings. Oh, so it was wonderful. She just asked me about my career, what I was doing presently in Covent Garden. Much more interesting was, and the other thing is, they say the ceremony will start a minute to a minute and a half later than scheduled because Her Majesty will be giving a posthumous award privately in an antechamber. Sure enough, a minute and a half into it, she makes her entrance, and the ceremony will be over at 12:14 and a half. Sure enough, 12:14 and a half, it's over. And Bob Tier, my old pal, said to me once, "See if you can identify the music they're playing when you get your thing." So I said, "Okay, well, that should be easy enough. Well, see if you can." So up in the gallery is a small band. There's a man in a red uniform playing a double bass, which looks totally incongruous, and another soldier in uniform playing a violin, which looks even more incongruous, and then others playing serpents and other hardy-type instruments, I think, by the sounds of it. And so you go forward, and as you're going forward, you're thinking, what is that music? I can't identify it, but the only reason you can't identify it is that it's so bad. It's a bad selection, badly played.
Yeah.
Maybe the King will change that.
Well, we'll hope so, yes. A little bit of power.
It was memorable.
Yes, indeed. One of the vestiges of my preparation for the two of you was going to say that Sir Andrew, of course, was knighted the same year, but I presume not on the same day.
Well, I didn't see him.
No.
No, it wasn't the same day.
No. Most recently, this is my last question, most recently you've had 10 years as Chancellor of Durham University, and you've been directing opera. Any comments to make on either of those two? How has Durham improved in its musicology as a result of your being there?
Well, it's interesting you ask. Durham always had a very good reputation for its music, with the little school on Palace Green, which is where I sang for Arthur Hutchings all those years before. And this year, in April, the university took delivery of 71 Steinways. 17 grands, and I mean the others are Bostons and Essex and what have you, but manufactured by Steinway in Hamburg. And we took delivery of 71 of them. And so Durham being a collegiate university, each college now has about 3 major pianos in it. And they're all over the place. And I was there just a few days ago for something up at the castle, and immediately someone was on stage at the castle playing a wonderful Steinway, and I know there's another one just through there, and they're all over the place. And the effect is astonishing, because students are applying to be there for that reason alone from all over the world, and we need them, you know. And the quality of music making there is astonishing. 5 of our students came down for an introduction day at Steinway Hall earlier on in the March, I think it was, or maybe even late February. So we all met across the way in Steinway Hall there, and Charles gave one of the Steinway board people, one of their pros, gave them a masterclass. When I tell you that 3 of these girls were law students, one of them was a French student, and the other one was actually reading music, but reading music academically. And the playing was phenomenal, playing Chopin, playing Bach, Busoni, and all kinds of things. And the level of music is fantastic, really fantastic. And it thrills me to see it. I've taken part in umpteen concerts there with orchestras, chamber groups, recitals and what have you, and it's been an absolute thrill, and it's getting stronger and stronger. And my wish and hope is that it reaches out and gets hold of the community and has an effect there, and I think it is beginning to do so. Yeah.
We are on a bit of a time shortage, but do we have a couple of quick questions? That's Roy at the back.
We're running very late.
Are we? Right. I thought I was going up to 5 o'clock. No. Okay. Well, I hope that I've asked all the questions that you were thinking of asking. If not, I apologise. But shall we show our appreciation to our most wonderful guests?